တွေ့အာယုံပေါ်တာနဲ့မြန်မြန်တွတ်တွတ်ပဲဘာမှစဉ်းစားနေလို့မလို့တော့အဲ့ဒီအာယုံကြီးပဲအရောက်သွားရမှာပဲအဲ့ဒီအာယုံကိုအပြီးမှတ်ရမှာအဲ့ဒီအဓိပ္ပာယ်မျိုးကိုခဏသတိပဋ္ဌာနာပဋ္ဌာနာအဓိပ္ပာယ်ရပါတယ်လက်ခံလေးဒီမှာပို့တတိလို့ပြောပြတာအဲ့ဒါယောဂီသိရေးကြည့်ပါလေ
Sayadaw says when you are noting each and every object beginning from the primary object as rising and falling, when there arises rising, you don't need to think anymore. Get the rising immediately when you see the rising moment. Act quickly to get the rising, whole rising process as a one process as rising. You shouldn't try to think how the rising arises, how the rising will pass away, whether I overlook the rising or whether I miss it. If you try to think in that way, you never get the rising process as rising. And you cannot note precisely, and you cannot know precisely too. So you miss the actual noting of rising. But if your observing power is really following immediately, quickly, when the rising will be there, and your effort is precisely working together with the observing power, then you never miss the rising as rising and the falling as falling. So you will get the rising and falling very easily, very comfortably. And you know what is rising, what is falling. So in this way, the rising noting becomes accurate, concurrent, and precise. But there are some yogis, they tend to think in the process of rising, now rising starts. This is the beginning of rising, yes. And this is the middle of rising, all right. And this is the end of rising. Oh, good. I get the rising, beginning, middle, and end. Really, the yogis are not noting the rising as rising. They are just thinking about the rising. This is the beginning, this is the middle, and this is the end. Noting shouldn't be like that. You don't need to divide and discriminate. This is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end. Your work is just to get the whole process as rising. And you have to note as one process as rising from the beginning to the end. So to note whole process together, therefore it is said there will be beginning, middle and end. But it is not to note separately this is the beginning, this is the middle and this is the end. That is the mistaking noting. So therefore Sayadaw says you shouldn't try to think in that way. If you do that, then you never get the rising and you never get the falling. And you never know what is rising and you never know what is falling. So therefore Sayadaw says it is necessary, just you have to get the rising when it appears. Go quickly, act quickly, without adding any additional thought in it. Then your noting will be perfect.
တချို့ယောဂီတွေရှုခွင့်တက်တဲ့အာယုံနဲ့အချိန်တတ်မှပြီးတာပါလေပိုင်းခြားပြီးတာနေတတ်မှပြီးတာအဲ့ဒါမကွဲကြဘူးဖြစ်တယ်အမှန်ကပေါ်လာတဲ့အာယုံကရှုစရာအာယုံကရှုရမယ့်အာယုံကိုတက်တယ်အဲ့ဒါကိုမှတ်ပါလို့ညွှန်ကြားထားတာ မှတ်ပါဆိုတော့ဘယ်ကနေဘယ်ဒီမှတ်ရမှာတော့ဆိုတာပေါ့ချိန်တတ်မှပြဆိုကြပါစို့ဘာမှစိတ်ကြိုက်ထားတဲ့ကပုံကြီးပေါ်လာပုံကြီးပေါ်စားတဲ့ကနေပြီးတော့တောက်လျှောက်ဆုံးတဲ့အထိမှတ်ပါဆိုတာပေါ့ချိန်တတ်မှပြတာပဲအစားကနေအဆုံးကိုမှတ်ရမယ်ပြောတာမဟုတ်ဘူးအဲ့ဒီအထိမှတ်ပါပြတာမှတ်ရမှာအပေါင်းကိုမှတ်ရမှာသုံးလုံးပိန်မှုကိုမှတ်ရမှာအခြားခြားပေါ်ရတယ်မှတ်ရမှာအဲ့လိုသဘောမပေါ်ဘူးဖြစ်နေတော့ခွဲပြီးတော့စဉ်းစားပြီးတော့အလုပ်လုပ်နေတော့သိပြီးတော့ကြက်တယ်သူစဉ်းစားပြီးတော့လုပ်တယ်ဆိုတော့သဘောတရားလည်းမထင်လာဘူးဒါပဲပြီးတော့ယောဂီတွေတော့ပြင်မှုတော့လိုအပ်တယ်ဆိုတာပေါ့ဘုန်းကြီးကနားလည်ပြီးတော့ခဏပฏิပဋ္ဌာန်ဆိုတဲ့ပုံမှာတွေ့ခံနေကြောင့်ဘုဒ္ဓဒီအတိတ်ပဲတော့ဒီခြားခြားသဘောပေါက်အောင်မပြောပါပဲမြန်မြန်ကြီးစဉ်းစားဖို့မရှိပဲနဲ့ရှုသွင်းစီစိတ်ရောက်ဖို့ပဲဒါပဲအရေးကြီးတယ်ဆိုတာပေါ့တီးဖို့မလိုသေးဘူးဒီအပိုင်းမှာဘာလဲဘယ်လိုပဲရုပ်ပဲနာပဲဆိုတာတီးဖို့မလိုသေးဘူးရောက်အောင်လုပ်ဖို့ပဲလိုတာပဲဆိုတာဒါတော့တိုက်တွန်းပြောဖို့လိုတာပဲဆိုလို့ခင်ဗျာဒီဟာကိုကြက်ကြတယ်မှာရှင်းပြတာပါ
So Sayadaw says, therefore, during the noting of each and every object, whatever it may be, beginning from the primary object rising and falling, your work is just to try to get the object and try to note it and know it. You don't need to divide, you don't need to discriminate, and you don't need to think any more when the object will be there. The timing is there to note the target. Suppose Sayadaw says, you are focusing your mind on the abdominal area to get the rising. And rising immediately arises. So there is the beginning point of rising. And if your mind is really focusing on that abdominal area, so what you need to do is try to get the beginning point. And how much you have to note. And then there will be the instruction that you have to note from the beginning to the end. That is the timing. How you have to note the process of rising. But not knowing that actual instructions, so you are trying to divide the noting. This is the beginning of rising. This is the middle of rising. And this is the ending of rising. And you are adding your own thought in the noting. So, and you get tired with that, because you cannot get as a whole process anymore when there will be thinking process, and it hinders your noting the rising as a one process. So Sayadaw says, to give you that impression, and he is trying to urge you that you have to note the rising when the rising starts. Try to get from the starting point and go forward together without adding any thought up to the end. So that means whole process you have to try to note. At that time you don't need to try to think what kind of nature will be there, what kind of manner will be there, what kind of function will be there, what kind of form will be there. Not necessary. So just try to get rising as rising. And you don't need to say, oh, this is the material, the physical object, and this is the mental object. Just at the beginning, the meditator's work and duty is to get precisely the rising as rising and falling as falling and any other object in the same way. So in this way you have to note and you have to get the rising with precise observing power. If you have really meaningful act in your practice, as it is explained in the text, Pakhanditva Pavatati, the mind observing power act quickly without adding any thought and try to get the object immediately, then you will really using the meaningful observing power of mindfulness in your noting. Then you will get each and every object clearly, and your noting will become precise. As much as the preciseness will be there in your noting, so much you understand about the rising, about the falling very clearly. You don't need to try to think and expect to have all sorts of phenomenal natures in your noting. Those will come themselves or itself if your endeavor, if your noting, observing power is really accurate. And the second. Sayadaw says, in the noting each and every object, you have to try at first, in first moment or first second, that the rising is there. So the beginning point of rising you have to get and try to go until it will end. So that two types of secondary seconds, noting seconds, if followed together in your noting, the noting will become clear. So you need to get the beginning point from the target and try. You have to falling into it the observing power without missing the whole process.
No,
and when you get exercise in it, proper exercise in it, then within 1 second, so you can clearly note each and every object from the primary object, beginning from the primary object. So Sayadaw says, the process which Sayadaw has already explained now, if you couldn't follow the instruction as Sayadaw has instructed just now, if you add additional thoughts in your noting, leave to have the understanding, even you cannot have the concentrated mind. So if you lose concentration, then there won't be understanding. So therefore Sayadaw wants to urge you not to add any kind of additional thought in your noting. So the time is over. Today our discourse will stop now.